I was listening as the majority leader said that this is no longer an emergency and that we do not minimize the severity and seriousness of our situation and of this pandemic. But we've learned some shocking things this week about leaders who have minimized the severity of this pandemic quite purposely and quite maliciously. In a January 28th top secret intelligence briefing, National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien gave President Trump a jarring warning about the virus, telling the president it would be the biggest national security threat of his presidency. We've learned that in a February 7th interview with Bob Woodward, the president said, quote, "It goes through the air. That's always tougher than the touch, but the air, you just breathe the air, and that is how it is passed," end quote. Also, he said, quote, "It is more deadly even than your most strenuous flu," end quote. On March 19th, the president said, quote, "Just today and yesterday, some startling facts came out. It's not just older, young people too, plenty of young people," end quote. Again on March 19th, quote, "I always wanted to play it down. I still like playing it down because I don't want to create a panic," end quote. So three things were known by the president right around the time we shut down this legislature and adjourned. And 6 days after Governor Walz initially declared a peacetime emergency, it was known by the president and federal leadership that the virus was airborne, that it was highly deadly, much more so than influenza, and that it affected people of all ages, not just the elderly. And yet he misrepresented these conditions to the American people repeatedly over the next months, as he says, to avoid a panic. In going to the records of our Senate chamber over the last several months, our Republican colleagues have joined the effort to play it down, and they have repeatedly asserted that young people are not affected. They have scorned masks and distancing despite the president's knowledge that the virus is airborne. So we're left to wonder, did the senators do this even though they knew better, as the president did, to try to avoid a panic, or were they unaware of the truth as the president tried to hide it? Let's go to the record so people can decide for themselves. On April 16th, the majority leader stood on the floor and said, quote, "Nationwide, if we haven't reached the peak, we're just about over that peak," end quote. On that day, there were 639,000 cases of COVID-19 in the United States. Today, there are 6.36 million cases. On May 7th, in committee, Senator Jensen said, quote, "Every bit of data we're seeing is that we're dealing with a respiratory illness that lasts 3 to 5 days. We have about 1 to 2% of the population that is at significant risk," end quote. On May 11th, Senator Osmek said, quote, "Let's put this in perspective. There are only 330 deaths in Minnesota," end quote. Today there are 1,800 deaths from COVID-19 in Minnesota and 190,000 deaths across the United States. On June 12th, Senator Abler said, quote, "The curve is flattened. I hope we can declare a success today. We are well on track," end quote. At that time, there were 2.1 million cases in the United States. Today there are 6.36 million. On July 13th, Senator Relf said, quote, "People will say that, oh my gosh, the cases are going up again," and they are, but what they fail to acknowledge is that so are the number of tests that are being taken, so in terms of real numbers, cases are declining, end quote. I still am not sure I understand what was being said there, but there are currently 82,000 positive cases in Minnesota, and there were 380 new cases yesterday. On July 13th, Senator Jasinski said, quote, "People are born, people die. We need to get our kids into schools. We need to open our businesses," end quote. On July 13th, Senator Nelson said, "In countries where they have open schools, students seem to play a much smaller response in driving the spread of disease." If the president's strategy was to play it down, he had eager teammates in the halls of this chamber. If he knew that young people were susceptible to the virus and at risk for dangerous complications, and he did, he either didn't share that information with our colleagues or he asked them to deny it. Minnesotans have seen this and they understand it. No wonder that in a recent survey of 641 physicians by the Minnesota Medical Association, 80% of Minnesota doctors rated Governor Walz's management of the pandemic at good or very good. As one member said, Governor Walz used the talent and expertise available to him to make hard calls. He made clear, concise, science-based decisions. In that same survey, 77% of those docs rated the federal response at poor or very poor. A full 51% chose very poor, and this survey was taken before this latest bombshell about the willful misrepresentation of the virus's dangers by President Trump. As one physician said, quote, "It has been an absolute catastrophe, and hundreds of thousands will die as a result of failed leadership." Minnesotans rightly trust Governor Walz to manage this well, and with good reason. Rescinding the governor's emergency powers would have an immediate impact on Minnesotans. The moratorium on evictions, for example, suddenly ended would lead to a surge of homeless families across our state. That is not only a humanitarian crisis, but also a public health threat, as homeless individuals are at increased risk for contracting and transmitting the virus. In addition, the governor's swift and nimble ability to procure essential resources, such as personal protective equipment, would be impaired. Protections that he has placed against price gouging would be vacated. Governor Walz has used his emergency powers carefully and judiciously to try to balance our physical and our economic health. He has done that while being honest with us as Minnesotans about how serious the virus is. He has never lied to us. He has never taken an easy political solution, which helped him in the short run, but hurt Minnesotans in the long term. Minnesotans see this and they trust the governor. Vote no.